Welcome to True Crime Case Files, the podcast where we uncover the darkest truths behind the most shocking crimes. In today's episode, we delve into a chilling story of power and obsession. A police officer's fixation on an 18-year-old girl spirals out of control, ultimately ending in tragedy. Join us as we uncover the dark details of this harrowing case and examine how an obsession turned deadly. Laker Green was an 18-year-old with her whole life ahead of her. She had recently graduated from Franklin High School in Livonia, Michigan, and was working part-time at a local Denny's to save money for community college. Laker dreamed of becoming a nurse, inspired by her mother's battle with cancer years earlier. Her family described her as warm and caring, someone who lit up every room she entered. She lived with her father, Richard Green, an insurance adjuster, in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A few months before her death, Laker's life took an unexpected turn when she met Officer James Jim Brody. Brody, 35, was a respected police officer with a decade of service in Livonia. Their paths crossed when he responded to a noise complaint at her home. According to friends, Brody was polite and professional during the visit, but he struck up a friendly conversation with Laker, which later evolved into a relationship. At first, Laker seemed flattered by Brody's attention. He would stop by Denny's after his shift, leaving her large tips and offering to walk her to her car. Over time, their relationship became romantic. Laker confided to a close friend that Brody was charming but intense, often texting her multiple times a day to check on her whereabouts. Their relationship turned sexual during the summer of 2012. Friends noticed a shift in Laker's behavior. Once outgoing and bubbly, she grew withdrawn and nervous. She often glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to be watching. Brody's possessiveness increased, and Laker felt trapped but unsure of how to end things. The situation became even more complicated when Laker discovered she was pregnant in early August. She confided in her best friend after taking a home pregnancy test from the local Walgreens. Laker didn't know who the father was, Brody or her ex-boyfriend, Cameron Hall. Her relationship with Cameron had been tumultuous, marked by his possessiveness and relentless attempts to rekindle their romance after their breakup. The uncertainty weighed heavily on Laker in the days before her death. She journaled about her fears, writing that she felt overwhelmed and unsure of her future. She worried about how Brody would react to the news, knowing his temper and controlling nature. Laker's last days were a whirlwind of anxiety and dread, as she tried to navigate the complexities of her relationships and the looming reality of becoming a teenage mother. On August 22, 2012, the late summer heat was stifling in Livonia, Michigan, with temperatures hovering near 85 degrees. Around 3:30 p.m., local realtor Sharon Whitaker was preparing to show a foreclosed home on Arborview Drive to a prospective buyer. The house had been on the market for months, abandoned and in disrepair, a stark contrast to the otherwise tidy suburban neighborhood. As Sharon walked through the dimly lit basement with her client, she noticed an odd smell. At first, she thought it might be mildew or a dead animal, common in long vacant homes. But as she moved closer to a corner, she spotted something that stopped her cold. Lying on the concrete floor was the lifeless body of a young woman. Sharon immediately recognized it wasn't an accident or a natural death. The woman's face was pale, and there were visible marks around her neck. The body appeared to have been hastily left there, with no effort to hide it. Sharon's client, a middle-aged man, froze in shock, stepping back toward the staircase. Sharon managed to stay calm enough to dial 911. Her hands trembling as she described what she saw. "I think it's a murder," she told the operator. "There's a young woman here in the basement. She's not breathing." The call was brief, but Sharon's voice shook as she relayed the address. By the time police arrived, she and her client were waiting outside on lawn, both visibly shaken. Sharon later told local reporters from the Detroit Free Press that it was an image she'd never forget. Within minutes, Livonia police officers were on the scene. The basement was sealed off, and detectives began their initial assessment. The victim was identified as 18-year-old Laker Green. She was found in a fetal position, her hands loosely curled by her side. A preliminary examination revealed she had been strangled, and her body showed no signs of being moved after death. News of the discovery spread quickly through the neighborhood, with residents gathering at a distance, whispering in hushed tones. Many expressed disbelief that such a horrific act could happen so close to home. For Laker's family, the nightmare had only just begun. The Livonia police arrived promptly at the abandoned house on Arborview Drive, with the secretly gay detective Mark Calhoun leading the investigation. known for his thorough, no-nonsense approach, Calhoun had solved numerous cases in the Livonia area, though few were as disturbing as this one. Officers quickly sealed off the scene, with yellow crime tape stretching across the front yard as curious neighbors gathered nearby. The scene was grim but relatively clean. There was no blood, and the only visible signs of trauma were the bruising around Laker's neck, indicating she had been strangled. Her body was found curled in a fetal position, her eyes closed, and her hands resting loosely at her sides. Detectives noted no evidence of a struggle, which suggested she may have been caught off guard by her attacker. Forensic technicians from the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office arrived shortly after to collect evidence. They took samples from Laker's body and clothing, looking for any trace of DNA, fibers, or fingerprints that could link to a suspect. Detectives also combed through the house, gathering any evidence that could help piece together what happened in the final hours of Laker's life. When Laker's body was transported to the morgue, a routine autopsy and toxicology screening were performed. A few days later, the autopsy results revealed something unexpected. Laker was pregnant at the time of her death. Forensic analysis confirmed this, and the news added a new layer of complexity to the case. Detectives discovered that Laker hadn't told anyone about her pregnancy, not even her closest friends. This revelation raised questions about her relationships, particularly her recent involvement with Officer James "Jim" Brody and her ex-boyfriend, Cameron Hall. Investigators now had to determine the identity of the unborn child's father, which could potentially provide a motive for her murder. The police shared their findings with the local media, and the news spread quickly through Livonia. Detroit Free Press and other outlets picked up the story, reporting on the tragic twist that this young woman, on the brink of adulthood and facing an unexpected pregnancy, had her life cut short. Detectives continued piecing together Laker's final days, hoping to understand how and why she ended up in that empty basement. As police pursued leads, the community mourned, with many wondering what could drive someone to harm a young woman and her unborn child. As police pieced together Laker Green's final days, they turned their focus to Officer James "Jim" Brody, a respected 35-year-old member of the Livonia Police Department. Brody had been open about his relationship with Laker, claiming she was the love of my life. When detectives questioned him, Brody appeared composed but emotional, repeatedly denying any involvement in her death. "She was everything to me," he told investigators during an interview at the precinct. "I would never hurt her. I was planning to be there for her, no matter what." Brody claimed he had been at home the night Laker went missing, providing vague details about spending the evening watching reruns of NCIS. However, Brody's calm demeanor struck investigators as calculated, especially when he seemed to over-explain certain details of his alibi. Detectives decided to dig deeper into Brody's personal life, reaching out to his ex-wife, Karen Brody. Karen, now living in Farmington Hills with their 2 children, initially hesitated to speak but ultimately agreed to meet with detectives. Her account painted a very different picture of the man who claimed to love Laker. Karen described Brody as controlling and quick to anger during their marriage. "He always had to know where I was, who I was talking to, and what I was doing," she said, her voice trembling. At first, it seemed like he was just protective, but over time, it became suffocating. If I didn't answer his calls or texts right away, he'd show up at my work or accuse me of lying. She also revealed incidents of physical intimidation. While she stopped short of accusing him of outright physical abuse, Karen recalled moments where Brody punched walls during arguments or grabbed her arm tightly enough to leave bruises. "I stayed for the kids, but eventually I realized I couldn't take it anymore," she said, explaining her decision to file for divorce 3 years earlier. Karen's statements, combined with Brody's inability to provide solid evidence supporting his alibi, raised significant concerns. Detectives also learned from colleagues that Brody had a reputation for being overly invested in his personal relationships, often to the point of obsession. Several officers mentioned noticing Brody parked near Laker's neighborhood in the weeks leading up to her death, raising further suspicions. As investigators gathered more information, Brody's image as a reliable officer began to crumble. Detectives realized that beneath his calm exterior might lie the dangerous volatility that cost Laker her life. Cameron Hall, 19, was Laker Green's high school sweetheart. They had dated throughout most of their senior year, attending prom together in the spring of 2012 and sharing plans for the future. However, their relationship was anything but steady. friend of the couple described Cameron as intensely passionate but also possessive. His affection for Laker often spilled into obsession, with an overwhelming need for sex. One of the key factors in their breakup was Cameron's unrelenting sexual appetite. Laker confided to close friends that Cameron would pressure her for sex repeatedly throughout the day, sometimes begging for sex up to 30 times a day. This behavior left Laker feeling drained and suffocated. In early July, she ended their relationship, citing his inability to respect her lower sexual appetite. Cameron didn't take the breakup well. He sent her long, emotional text messages begging for a second chance and showed up unannounced at her part-time job at Denny's on multiple occasions. Laker, shaken but unwilling to escalate the situation, asked him to stop contacting her. When police identified Cameron as a person of interest, they immediately noted his turbulent history with Laker. Detective Mark Callan brought Cameron in for questioning just one day after Laker's body was discovered. During the interrogation, Cameron appeared nervous but cooperative. He told detectives he had been at home playing Call of Duty on his Xbox the night of Laker's murder. However, his alibi was weak, as no one could corroborate his story. The case took a shocking turn when forensic tests confirmed that Cameron was the biological father of Laker's unborn baby. Armed with this information, Detective Callan confronted Cameron during a second interview. His reaction was immediate and visceral. Cameron buried his face in his hands and began to cry, repeatedly muttering, "I didn't know. She didn't tell me." He claimed he had no idea Laker was pregnant and expressed a mix of guilt and grief, saying he wished she had told him so he could have fixed things between them. Despite his apparent remorse, detectives pressed him on potential motives. They asked if learning about the pregnancy might have driven him to confront Laker in anger, but Cameron denied any involvement in her death. "I'd loved her," he said, his voice breaking. "I would never hurt her." Police noted inconsistencies in Cameron's story, particularly his behavior in the weeks leading up to Laker's death. He had sent her a series of text messages, some of which detectives obtained from her phone records. While many were apologetic, others hinted at frustration, with one reading, "If I can't bleep you, no one will." This cryptic message raised eyebrows among investigators. Cameron remained under close scrutiny as the investigation unfolded. While his connection to Laker was undeniable, detectives struggled to find concrete evidence linking him to the crime scene. Still, the discovery of his paternity raised significant questions about his role in Laker's life and death. The investigation took a dramatic turn on August 29, 2012, when Livonia police uncovered critical new evidence. It began with a review of Officer Jim Brody's professional conduct. An audit of the department's systems revealed Brody had been improperly accessing police databases for months. He had been using these resources to track Laker Green's movements, as well as those of her family and friends. Records show he had looked up her home address, work schedule, and even details about her ex-boyfriend, Cameron Hall. This abuse of authority painted Brody as more than just a concerned officer. It revealed an obsessive pattern of stalking. Detective Mark Callan confronted Brody about this discovery. Though initially calm, Brody grew defensive, insisting his actions were part of an ongoing investigation. However, the lack of any official case file tied to Laker contradicted his claims. The revelation added weight to suspicions about Brody's involvement in her death. At the same time, another significant lead came from a closer examination of Laker's personal belongings. In her bedroom, investigators found a small, spiral-bound journal hidden beneath a stack of textbooks. The entries were a window into Laker's growing fear. She described feeling watched and followed, and she mentioned receiving a series of anonymous, threatening notes. The notes themselves were not found in her room, but Laker had described their contents in chilling detail. One entry read, "He said I'd be sorry if I didn't listen. I feel trapped. I don't know what to do." Detectives sent the journal to a forensic handwriting analyst. The results were shocking. The handwriting matched samples taken from Laker's father, Richard Green. This twist drastically shifted the focus of the investigation. Richard, a 45-year-old insurance adjuster, had been vocal in his disapproval of Laker's relationship with Brody, even confronting the officer in a heated argument at the local Denny's just weeks earlier. These developments left investigators with a tangled web of motives and suspects. The discovery of Brody's stalking behavior and Richard's threatening notes underscored the pressure Laker had been under in the weeks leading up to her death. The case was far from solved. But these revelations provided crucial pieces of the puzzle. As the investigation expanded, Richard Green, Lakers' 45-year-old father, emerged as a significant suspect. Richard was a divorced insurance adjuster known for his protective, some would say overbearing, nature toward his only daughter. While Richard claimed he had no involvement in Lakers' murder, details from witnesses and neighbors painted a more troubling picture. Police first learned of a heated argument between Richard and Officer James Jim Brody, a local Denny's, a popular chain in Livonia. On the evening of August 18, 2012, just days before Lakers' death, several diners and staff at the restaurant overheard their confrontation. Witnesses described the exchange as tense, with Richard raising his voice and pointing at Brody. One diner recalled him saying things like, "Stay away from my daughter, and you're ruining her life." Brody reportedly tried to de-escalate the situation, but Richard's anger was palpable. This argument suggested a deep animosity between the two men. Investigators suspected it might have boiled over into violence, especially when new evidence came to light about Richard's movements the night of Lakers' murder. Richard initially told police he spent the evening at home alone, watching reruns of NCIS on cable. However, neighbors contradicted his account. Several residents on Richard's quiet suburban street reported hearing shouting coming from his house late that night. One neighbor who lived directly across the street told detectives, "It was around 11 p.m. I heard yelling. A man's voice. It sounded angry, but I couldn't make out the words." Another neighbor mentioned seeing Richard's porch light flicker on and off during the commotion, suggesting movement inside the home. Police pressed Richard about these inconsistencies, but he maintained his innocence. He admitted to being upset about Lakers' relationship with Brody, claiming it was out of concern for her well-being. He was too old for her, Richard told detectives during questioning. "I just wanted her to see that." However, investigators grew more skeptical when they connected Richard's threatening notes to Lakers' journal. The handwriting match and his refusal to provide a solid alibi deepened their suspicion. While no physical evidence directly tied Richard to the crime scene, his behavior and the timeline of events kept him under intense scrutiny. Richard's volatile relationship with both Laker and Brody added another layer of complexity to the case. His actions, though possibly well-intentioned, raised serious questions about how far he was willing to go to protect his daughter. After weeks of meticulous investigation, police finally uncovered the chilling truth. Officer James Jim Brody, the 36-year-old veteran cop and Laker Green's secret lover, was her killer. The evidence pointed to a dark mix of obsession, betrayal, and desperation. Brody's actions on the night of August 22, 2012, painted a grim picture. Consumed by jealousy and fear of exposure, Brody confronted Laker at her home. He was spiraling, torn between his love for her, the guilt of betraying his family, and the pressure of maintaining his position as a respected police officer. According to investigators, Brody was furious over Laker's reluctance to break off contact with her ex-boyfriend Cameron and her refusal to continue their affair. Brody drove his unmarked patrol car to Laker's house late that night, carefully avoiding security cameras in the neighborhood. He let himself in with a spare key Laker had once trusted him with. Inside, the confrontation escalated quickly. Laker demanded he leave, accusing him of violating her boundaries. Overcome with rage and desperation, Brody attacked her, strangling her in the living room. To throw off investigators, Brody dumped Laker's body in an abandoned, foreclosed house located on the outskirts of Livonia. The house, which had been empty for months, seemed like the perfect location to hide her. Brody had learned about the property through his police work, knowing it had been previously foreclosed and was now off the radar of most people. Brody meticulously arranged the scene to make it seem like Laker had been a victim of a random crime, choosing the house to suggest a robbery gone wrong. He believed that no one would question a crime in such an isolated, abandoned home, especially not with his inside knowledge of local properties. He carefully wiped down any surfaces that could be traced back to him, confident that the crime would be difficult to solve. But despite his efforts to cover his tracks, Brody made a fatal mistake: his arrogance. He underestimated the police department's ability to follow the evidence and the tenacity of those searching for Laker. He thought his badge would protect him, but instead it was his downfall. The breakthrough came when forensic analysis revealed a partial shoe print near the crime scene that matched Brody's department-issued boots. Additionally, GPS data from his patrol car contradicted his alibi, placing him near Laker's home around the time of her death. Detectives also uncovered his misuse of police databases to track Lakers' movements, highlighting a pattern of obsessive behavior. Confronted with the mounting evidence, Brody maintained his innocence, but his demeanor cracked when police arrested him on September 15, 2012. Witnesses described him as visibly shaken, his confidence as an officer completely shattered. "You're making a mistake," he reportedly told detectives. "I would never hurt her." But investigators were certain. His journal, found hidden in his garage, contained disturbing entries detailing his obsession with Laker and veiled threats against anyone who got in his way. As Brody sat in his cell awaiting trial, he reportedly expressed a mix of anger and regret. Friends and colleagues were shocked by the revelation, and Livonia residents were left reeling, struggling to reconcile the image of a trusted officer with the cold-blooded killer behind Laker's tragic death. The trial of Officer James "Jim" Brody began on March 12, 2013 in the Wayne County Courthouse, drawing attention to the quiet Detroit suburb of Livonia, Michigan. The case captivated the public with its mix of forbidden love, betrayal, and murder, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, curious locals, and friends of the victim and the accused. Prosecuting attorney Diane Corbett opened the trial with a scathing argument. She laid out the evidence that painted Brody as a jealous and controlling lover who could not bear the thought of losing Laker Green. Corbett pointed to Brody's misuse of police resources, his stalking of Laker, and his desperate attempts to cover up the crime. She described Laker's death as a calculated act of violence fueled by obsession and rage. Brody's defense attorney, Paul Langley, painted a very different picture. He claimed Brody was innocent, suggesting the evidence was circumstantial and pointing fingers at other potential suspects, including Cameron and Laker's father, Richard Green. Langley insisted that Brody had been unfairly targeted because of his relationship with Laker, and he accused the police department of rushing to judgment. The prosecution's case leaned heavily on forensic evidence. Crime scene investigators testified about the shoe print matching Brody's department-issued boots and the GPS data from his patrol car, which placed him near Laker's home on the night of her murder. Additionally, Brody's journal, recovered from his garage, revealed his obsessive thoughts about Laker and his growing paranoia about losing her. One of the trial's most dramatic moments came when the prosecution presented threatening notes Laker had received in the weeks before her death. While Richard Green was initially suspected, handwriting experts testified that Brody had written the notes in an attempt to intimidate Laker into cutting ties with Cameron. Brody's demeanor in court was stoic but tense. At times he shook his head or whispered to Langley, visibly frustrated by the prosecution's claims. Friends and colleagues described the trial as surreal, struggling to reconcile the once respected officer with the man accused of such a heinous crime. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict on March 29, 2013. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman read aloud the decision: guilty of second-degree murder. Brody, who had maintained his innocence throughout the trial, was stunned. His defense attorney, Paul Langley, remained calm but visibly disappointed as the verdict was announced. Brody stood motionless for a few seconds, unable to process the outcome. His family, who had been supportive throughout the trial, looked on in disbelief. Laker's family, meanwhile, quietly wiped away tears. A sentencing hearing was scheduled for several weeks later. The judge, clearly moved by the statement, handed down a sentence of 25 to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Brody's family watched in silence as the sentence was read aloud. The former officer, who had once worn a badge and sworn to protect his community, was now facing decades behind bars. The aftermath of Laker Green's tragic death left the community in shock. In the months following his conviction, Officer James "Jim" Brody's life took a dramatic turn. His former colleagues and the community he once served were left shocked, as it had been difficult for many to believe that one of their own could commit such a brutal crime. Brody was sent to a high-security prison, where he quickly became a target for other inmates. His status as a former police officer made him a marked man in the prison system. He faced constant threats, and was often isolated from the general population for his safety. Brody's prison life was harsh, and many believed that the former officer's sense of invincibility, which he had relied on during his career, would no longer protect him. The realization of what he had done to Laker haunted him behind bars. Sources close to Brody reported that he expressed regret over his actions, but it was too late for any redemption. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, far removed from the law enforcement career he had once held dear. For Cameron, Laker's ex-boyfriend, his role in the case was complicated. Though he had been part of the investigation due to his turbulent relationship with Laker, police cleared him of any involvement in her murder. Cameron, who had struggled with his own issues, including an uncontrollable sexual appetite that led to the end of his relationship with Laker, was devastated by her death. He was never charged with any crime, but the emotional toll of losing Laker and being scrutinized by the police left him a broken man. Cameron's life never fully recovered from the tragedy, and he quietly disappeared from the public eye after the trial. Richard Green, Laker's father, also found himself at the center of the investigation. For weeks, he had been a person of interest due to threatening notes Laker had received, and his strange behavior during the investigation raised suspicions. But it was Brody's arrest that truly changed the trajectory of the case. Richard was never charged with any crime, though his complex relationship with his daughter remained a topic of public interest. He was not involved in Laker's death, but the emotional scars from their strained father-daughter relationship were clear. The fates of all involved were sealed in the wake of Laker's death. Officer Brody's life was over, Cameron's was changed forever, and Richard's guilt over his relationship with Laker remained unresolved.